अस्सलाम वालेकुम व्यूअर्स, NLPMantra.com इल्म की दुनिया campus.pk की तरफ से माइंड इंजीनियर मोहम्मद अली एज ऑलवेज एक मरतबा फिर आपके सामने हाजिर होंगे। आज हमारी एपिसोड बहुत ही मुख्तलिफ और बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त एपिसोड होने वाली है। अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह हर एपिसोड ही बहुत ज़बरदस्त जाती है बिकॉज मेरे व्यूअर्स बहुत अच्छे हैं, आप लोग इसको बहुत पसंद करते हैं, इसलिए ये एपिसोड जो है ये बहुत ज़्यादा मज़ेदार जाती है। आज की हमारी जो स्पेशल एपिसोड की स्पेशल बात है वो हमारे गेस्ट हैं who is all the way from Yale University और USA से हैं। Let me welcome him up front and then we'll start our talk. Assalamu alaikum Abdul Rahman, how are you?
वालेकुम सलाम अली भाई, हम बिल्कुल ठीक है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह with Allah's blessing and mercy. Ramzan Kareem, Ramzan Mubarak to you and to our family there and to all those who are watching.
Ramzan Mubarak to you as well, and viewers, let me tell you, he's also my younger brother and a cousin and a friend as well, you know. So मैंने आप लोगों को कहा था there will be surprise, मैं आप लोगों को relationship बाद में बताऊंगा, and mashallah he's doing an amazing work over there. अब भी मैं चाहूंगा कि for the viewers who are because this time we have a different viewership, ठीक है, different I mean bigger viewership than I had last time. So alhamdulillah we have a very diverse one as well, which is majority youth. हमारे साथ ज़्यादा जो व्यूअरशिप है वो बच्चे जवान बच्चों की है, कोई ग्रेड 10 का है, कोई 9 का है, कोई 11 का है, कोई 12 का है। सो वी हैव अ वेरी मिक्स ऑडियंस। तो थोड़ा सा पहले उनके लिए आपकी इंट्रोडक्शन हम कर दें so that they have an idea who is Abdul Rahman Malik, and then we'll move to the topic.
Thank you, Ali Bhai. Well, first, I just want to say what an honor it is to be with you again as part of this Ramzan Baythak program. It's such a wonderful initiative, and I think having these kinds of really relevant conversations about what's happening in the world right now is so important in the month of Ramadan. You know, I think people often feel like in Ramadan somehow we need to retreat from the world, and I think that's part of what Ramadan is all about. But
Yes.
Ramadan is also about how do we engage deeper in the world through our faith, through our spirituality, through our values, through our ethics.
मेरे व्यूअर्स का मैसेज आया, व्यूअर का मैसेज आया, सर उर्दू कराएं।
मैं कोशिश करता हूँ, आपको पता है my उर्दू has क्या कहते हैं कि उर्दू की टांग टूटी हुई है ना।
अरे यार बहुत अच्छी है। Okay, continue please, sorry.
तो मेरी पैदाइश तो कनाडा की है, and that's where I grew up. Mama and Abu came from Pakistan. Abu grew up in Multan. Ammi, as we know, grew up in Rawalpindi. And you know, my background is in education, is as a journalist, but also you know, for the last sort of 20 plus years has been organizing programs and engagements largely with young people all around the world, really to kind of support peace building, positive sort of Islamic messages, and also really to deal with some of the crises that we see within Muslim majority countries, particularly around religious and political extremism. And so, you know, I guess in so many ways my work has been about what is it within the Islamic tradition कि हमारे दीन के अंदर कौन सी चीजें हैं that strengthen us, that make us strong against the forces of extremism, but also energize us to become individuals who build our societies for the common good, for the good of everyone. And alhamdulillah, in 2017, I came to Yale University first as a fellow, and then later to coordinate education programs at the Council on Middle East Studies. And alhamdulillah, for the last 2 years, Ali Bhai, it's been my great privilege to be a lecturer at the Yale University School of Divinity, one of the oldest divinity schools in the United States, and an institution that's deeply respected and that I'm really privileged to teach at. And I actually teach Islam to Christian seminarians. So most of my students are Christians. वो ऐसा ही है. They're training to be ministers. They're training to be pastors. They're training to be clergy members. They're training to work in Christian organizations or in faith-based organizations, and those are my students. And I teach 2 classes, an introduction to Islam, and then I teach also a class in contemporary theology, which means that I look at issues around inequality. I look at issues around gender. I look at issues, as we talked about last year, Ali Bhai, you remember issues around racism,
बेशक
particularly racism here in the United States. So that's the way I come. I also do something else, Ali Bhai, and I think this is important for our discussion today. I run a program here, and I have for the last 3 years, alhamdulillah, called the Muslim Leadership Lab. And the Muslim Leadership Lab is a kind of a unique space that we've created here at the university to serve not only our Muslim students, but those students who want to learn from the experience of Muslims and also from Muslim and Islamic traditions. And the goal of that leadership lab is to provide our students with the context, the confidence, and the skills to actualize their potential to lead and to serve. Because of course, as you know, as someone who's in this field, leadership and service go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And really our inspiration, Ali Bhai, comes from the words, the hadith of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. और रसूल सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने हमको बताया है कि leadership is an essential part of the calling of every believer. And this is an important point. Every believer is called to leadership. Why? Because the Prophet tells us clearly, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon whom be peace, that each one of you is a shepherd. And each one should take care of that which they are shepherding. Means it isn't, for example, that we are told that only the men amongst you are shepherds. It isn't told that only the elite amongst you are shepherds. The ones with money are shepherds. The ones with privilege are shepherds. The ones with power are shepherds. No. Each and every one of you, each believer, is a shepherd, is given the responsibility to lead and to serve. And so this is our fundamental principles that we built the leadership program on, is to really instill in our students a sense that each one of us is called to leadership in some way. And of course, you cannot be called to leadership unless you are called to service. And along with service comes a sense of humility. It comes a sense of knowing when to exert leadership and when to support others who are leading. And I feel like the second part of it, Ali Bhai, is that for me, there are a lot of important lessons in the history of the United States in particular, and particularly in the history of the struggle of African American people, of Black people in the United States for freedom. And one of the great thinkers, one of the great, I would say, not just thinkers, I would say one of the great theorists of leadership amongst the African American freedom movement was a woman by the name of Ella Baker. And Ella Baker was this remarkable activist and a remarkable leader and a remarkable thinker. And Ali Bhai, she said something that when I read it, it reminded me of the Prophet's hadith. She talked about, in her approach to leadership, she said, there was a time when we needed a Moses, right? But the time for one Moses is over. We need now everyone to be a Moses, right? We don't need a leaderless movement. We need a leaderful movement, right? Where everyone rises to the call of leadership.
Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum.
Exactly. And so when I started looking at the work of Ella Baker and the way in which she organized in the American South during the height of the movement for civil and human rights in the United States, it became a real inspiration point for me. So our program very much merges these two traditions, an American tradition and the African American tradition, and of course, our Islamic tradition. And we use that as our inspiration to do this work. So that's the kind of things that I'm doing these days, Ali Bhai.
माशाल्लाह, great जी अब्दुल। और ये आयशा का एक हमारा मैसेज आया हमारी व्यूअर का, वो कह रही है leadership means to take responsibility and to be answerable for what we possess.
Absolutely, Aisha, that's a really wonderful wonderful observation.
And let me tell you one thing. मैं हमेशा ये कहता होता हूँ कि सूरह आराफ is a surah that we all must understand अगर ज़्यादा नहीं भी तो एटलीस्ट द फर्स्ट 30 आयात, उसमें अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला ने जो डिफरेंस बताया है बिटवीन अनसक्सेसफुल लोगों के और सक्सेसफुल लोगों का, वो है कि अनसक्सेसफुल जो कि अगवैतनी के कॉन्सेप्ट पे चलते हैं, विच इज़ ब्लेमिंग एंड विक्टिम मेंटालिटी, एंड सक्सेसफुल वो हैं जो कहते हैं रब्बना ज़लमना अनफुसना, so they take responsibility of their actions. So that to me is the beginning of leadership.
Exactly, like Ali bhai, we can take that one step further, right? हम रमजान के अंदर हम जिक्र करते हैं, हम फिक्र करते हैं और हम मुहासबा लेते हैं.
बेशक.
Right? We have accountability with ourselves before God. And that's the beautiful thing about fasting. Rosa is such an intimate activity, right? That we are engaged with an intimate conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you're absolutely right. That comes with like a sense of accountability before God, not to man, not to a woman, not to a human being. Ultimately, where is our accountability? Our accountability is to the creator of the heavens and the earth. And so I'm with you, bhai. That's a beautiful framing.
वो अभी ना वो पर कल अम्मी से बात हो रही थी तो अम्मी बताने लगी कि उन्होंने एक वीडियो देखी कि मुसलमान जितना कमजोर से कमजोर भी है, व्हेन इट कम्स कि जी वो रोजे के ऊपर है तो उसका वो भूखा रह लेगा, चाहे वो बाकी सारी गलतियां करेगा, लेकिन वो कम से कम भूखा रहेगा. तो वो एक ना अमेरिका में उन्होंने एक लड़की ने ब्यूटीफुल ब्लॉन्ड, व्हाट शी डिड वाज दैट उसने एक आईफोन पकड़ा और आईफोन लेके वो सड़क पर निकल गई और पूछती तुम आर यू अ मुस्लिम, मुसलमान हो? अच्छा मैं तुम्हें ये आईफोन दूंगी, ये पानी की बोतल में से सिर्फ एक सिप मुंह से नीचे उतार लो. पीपल सेड नो. करते करते वो एक के पास गई, उसने कहा कि क्या तुम ये एक घूंट के बदले में, कहता ये आईफोन नया है, कहती हाँ इसमें साकी आईफोन, हाँ वाकई है. तो कहता ये मुझे मिल जाएगा, कहती हाँ मिल जाएगा. कहता मुझे क्या करना है, कहती जस्ट अ ड्रॉप ऑफ वाटर इनसाइड योर थ्रोट. तो कहता अच्छा चलो लाओ दो मुझे. उसने यूँ पकड़ा तो जो उसके साथ दूसरा लड़का खड़ा था उसने उसकी पानी की बोतल नीचे गिरा दी. तो वो उससे लड़ना शुरू हो गया, ये तुमने मेरा मसला है ना, मैं अल्लाह को जवाब दे. मैंने कहा तुझे तो मैं नहीं पीने दूंगा, ठीक है. एंड ही उसने फिर उठाई, उसने फिर गिरा दी, ठीक है. सो इवन द वीकेस्ट ऑफ द मुस्लिम्स, यू नो, एट एनी पॉइंट इन टाइम दे नो अकाउंटेबिलिटी होनी है, एंड दे एक्चुअली एडहेयर टू दैट, व्हिच टेक्स मी अप टू माय नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, और वो है हमारा आज का टॉपिक. मैं लेट मी पुट द टॉपिक फॉर द ऑडियंस एज वेल वंस अगेन. यूथ डेवलपमेंट या तरबिया of youth, what does it entail? I mean, इस पे मैंने ऑलरेडी इस पे 2 प्रोग्राम्स किए भी हैं इस टॉपिक पे. एवरीबॉडी हैज कम अप विद हिज ओन पर्सपेक्टिव. तो मैं जानना चाहूंगा जब हम ये बात करते हैं यूथ डेवलपमेंट की, so what comes to your mind?
You know, it's such a deep question because, you know, I think in some ways we always talk about youth development, but the question for me always is to what extent are we investing in that development actually, and to what extent are we trusting in the youth that we develop? हम youth को बड़ी program, leadership development सब कुछ हम दे देते हैं, लेकिन आखिर में हम उनके ऊपर कोई भरोसा नहीं रखते, right? Right? We don't trust them. And this is part of our dilemma. This is like, it's like a flaw in our curriculum, in our pedagogy, right? कि हम सबको ये ट्रेनिंग देते हैं, फिर कहते हैं नहीं आप अपनी ट्रेनिंग इस्तेमाल नहीं कर सकते. Right? You can't really exercise your agency. And I think this is part of the dilemma of youth development. I go back, Ali Bhai, and I think in this month of Ramadan, we're continuing to connect ourselves, right, to the way of our beloved Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
सर उर्दू में कोशिश करो यार.
फैजान मैं कोशिश करता हूँ, लेकिन हम if we look to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and हम देखते हैं कि Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam के ताल्लुकात क्या थे अपने नौजवानों के साथ, right? How did he behave with the young people in his community? We find a prophet who is so accessible, right, to the young. Think about the people who joined the Prophet ﷺ. जब कुरान रसूल पाक ﷺ के दिल के ऊपर नाजिल हुआ और वो वापस खदीजा अलैहिस्सलाम के पास गए और उसके बाद दावा शुरू हुआ. Who was the first to join? Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, the youngest, most dynamic, right, most articulate, strong, confident young person in Mecca,
और आप
right?
first 10 converts देख लो ना, उनमें से 7 were young people.
Young people. It is telling. It is telling that these young people are drawn to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right?
और आपके
And
सलाम
then
ने कभी उन्होंने कहा कि अली तुम तो बच्चे हो, अभी तुम ठहर जाओ.
kabhi nahi,
You
not
take responsibility.
once. Not once. In fact, gave responsibility from the very beginning, right?
Actually,
Endowed him with responsibility to the extent that Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajha, is in the bed of the Prophet as they come to kill him. Can you imagine the level of confidence, the level of the level of
तरबिया यार, मैं
commitment?
तो उसको level of तरबिया कहूंगा.
Tarbiyah, it is because they
It
grew
is
up
the
in the
ultimate thing.
exactly. We grew up in the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the blessing of the Ahlul Bayt and the companions, right? That they grew up in the hudur, in the vicinity and in the company of the Prophet. But this is my point, Ali Bhai, that if we look at the seerah, we look at the seerah where the Prophet is constantly in conversation with, and the Prophet is in constant company of young people, and giving them, as you said, responsibility and constant advice, and never belittling them, never treating them like they are not important. In fact, the Prophet broke the rules of Arabian society by bringing the young people with him and next to him. Who goes and speaks to Najashi when the first migration happens? It's Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Imam Ali. And can you imagine, how old is Ja'far? He's a young man. And here he is representing really the hope and the future of the entire ummah in front of Najashi, who is now considering, do I accept them as refugees or do I cast them out and send them back to certain death in Mecca? And look at the confidence, we're told, with which Ja'far ibn Abi Talib addresses the king, right? So the Prophet is actively giving the young people a leadership.
हम अंस बिन मालिक की मिसाल देते हैं बार बार कि जी अंस बिन मालिक, और अंस बिन मालिक के वो जो बच्चे वाली खेलने की मिसाल उनकी बहुत दी जाती है. So this is all. मैं हमेशा एक बात कहता होता हूँ, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, कि दरबू का जो लफ्ज इस्तेमाल हुआ है, उस लफ्ज दरबू की एक्सप्लेनेशन ये भी दरबू है और ये भी दरबू है. हमें किसी ने ये सिखा दी है क्योंकि ये उसके लिए कन्वीनियंट थी, जबकि हमारे जो रोल मॉडल है नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, उन्होंने तो शायद ये भी कभी नहीं किया.
Exactly, bhai. This is such a critical point. In fact, मैं कल ही अपने students के साथ यही बात हम कर रहे थे. 3 घंटे हमारा एक डिस्कशन रहा इस एग्जैक्ट मौजू पे कि माशाल्लाह you brought it in front of us now, right? And आपकी बात बिल्कुल सही है. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not hit anyone in his household or in his community, right? The only time we know that the Prophet fought was in battle. And even then, many of the ulama tell us that the Prophet didn't kill anyone in battle, that he was able, that he was, except one, exactly. And even that was like aap keh sakte hain through the back door, right? Aap keh sakte hain through the back door, right?
Not directly.
Exactly, not directly. And iske andar kya ibrat hai hamare liye? Kya hikmah hai hamare liye? Right? That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could be a leader, decisive, and do so without violence. Incredible. It's incredible that we have this example. And you know what? He passed this on to those who are around him. Let me give you one example, bhai, of what I think is such a subtle, 2 examples actually of subtlety in leadership, right? One, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam जब वो सूक के अंदर जाते थे, बाजार में जाते थे, तो जो the young girls of Medina, बच्चियां, you know, they would come up to him and they would say, Ya Rasulullah, come with me. तो वो उनका मुबारक हाथ लेके उनको बाजार के अंदर और बाहर उनकी सैर करवाते थे कि to this stall, to this marketplace, to this house, to this garden, to this tree. They would take him around. What did the Prophet do? He went with them. The Prophet was known that when the children would take him by the hand, he would just be guided. He would just be guided. He'd just be guided. Just be guided. That is one example of leadership. Look at how he honored the young people. Take me where you want to take me. You know?
I think the only person he has ever stood up for, Fatma Raziyallahu anha, उनके अलावा तो कभी खड़े किसी बादशाह के लिए नहीं खड़े होते थे.
Exactly.
Again,
To
बेटी plus
honor, exactly, to honor your daughter. बेटी को, I mean, इज्जत की बात कोई और है. This is more than izzat, right? This is to say that you are everything to me.
Absolutely.
You are everything to me. The second example I want to give is look at the ways in which he treats Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein.
Yes.
Look at the way in which he teaches them, the way he allows them to play with him. You know, I always think about कि हम जब बच्चे मस्जिदों में जाते हैं हम कहते हैं कि चुप हो जाओ, इधर बैठो, कुछ पीछे जाओ, कुछ ना कहो. लेकिन इमाम हसन इमाम हुसैन उनके कमर के ऊपर खेलते थे, सवारियां करते थे, और जब वो अपने सुजूद में जाते थे उनके कमर के ऊपर बैठ के, so much so the Prophet's companions sometimes used to get worried कि खुदा न खास्ता रसूल सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम कुछ हो ना गया हो कि हम ऊपर होके हम देखें कि क्या यार रसूल सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम सुजूद में काफी देर से लगे हुए हैं, क्या हो रहा है. और फिर उनको नजर आया कि इमाम हसन और इमाम हुसैन उनकी कमर के ऊपर बैठ के खेल रहे थे.
वो एक दफा आपको याद होगा वाकया, वो खुतबा दे रहे थे तो सामने इमाम हसन थे या हुसैन थे, मुझे याद नहीं, वो गिर गए, और तो जैसे ही गिरे आप सल्लम खुतबा रोका, उतरे, उनको जाके उठाया और लाके फिर खुतबा देना.
Exactly.
आज का मौलवी ये काम करे ना जरा.
Exactly.
तो मौलवी को ही मार देंगे.
नहीं मौलवी को बिल्कुल मार देंगे. And then look at the way in which Imam Hassan Imam Hussein taught the elders in the community. उनने तो रसूल सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को घर के अंदर देखा हुआ था, वुजू करना, नमाज करना, खिदमत देना अपने खानदान को. This is where these children learned. And when they saw the man doing wudu incorrectly, right? How did they teach him? They didn't say कि हाँ अंकल ये आप ठीक तरह नहीं कर रहे. उनने अपने आप में एक खेल बना दिया कि one of them did wudu incorrectly, फिर दूसरे वाले कहा नहीं रसूल पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने हमको सिखाया था कि ऐसे करना है. फिर कहा ओ रसूल सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने ये कहा था, ठीक है मैं करता हूँ. फिर उस आदमी ने सुन लिया और सुना कि हाँ मैं भी ये चीज गलत कर रहा हूँ. देखे, I mean, this is wisdom. This is wisdom. But bhai, this is my point. This is leadership, right? Leadership is how do we move our communities with love, with patience, with compassion, and we move them to justice, right? How do we do that? And this is the prophetic way. So I feel like whether we're doing leadership development in the West or in the East, these principles are universal wisdom. And भाई ये एक और बात है, और मुझे पता है कि I know how much you believe in this, कि देखें हमारा जो इस्लाम है, I would call it universal human wisdom. Islam does not belong to the Muslims. Islam is ethics, morals, values, principles, perspectives that are universal, can be accessed by everyone, whether you call yourself a Muslim or not, right? Okay, this is a wisdom tradition, right? And you know, I think one important thing, Ali Bhai, and you know, in Pakistan sometimes these things get, and in our countries these things get twisted, right? Does God have a religion? Right? This is a question, right? Look at, is God a Muslim? God has to submit to nobody. Muslim ka kya mani hai, right?
Rabbul Alameen hai.
Exactly. He is above every religion. He is above every creed. He has given us a means of guidance, which we call Islam. Lekin, the God of our God is not the God of Islam. He is Rabbul Alameen. And therefore, our Islam is a way for us to connect to Rabbul Alameen. Why don't we teach and practice our Islam and share our Islam and our values and our learnings in a way that is universal? That we call people to follow the principles first, because its principles are the foundation of action. And I think this is part of the youth development problem, bhai. कि हम इतने rituals के ऊपर, you know, the practice. I'm not saying we don't practice. Of course, हम Ramzan के अंदर हैं. We're practicing, right? But that's not the point. The point to me is that it's not about the practice, right? That's not the first thing. What did the Rasul call to? Tawheed, right?
Tawheed.
The oneness of God, right? Tawheed is such a radical idea. Or आप देखें, I mean, just think about it's even today in 2021, what a radical idea Tawheed is. La ilah, nothing, no ilah, no God, no power, no elite, no strength, no nothing, illallah, except God. What a powerful idea that what we say is that we draw our power, our principles, our ethics, our morals from the source of all mercy, all wisdom, all knowledge, all compassion, all generosity, all grace, all justice. Those are
Dream girl,
beautiful.
definitely. Sorry, Dream girl, definitely you can say any question. So please, sorry.
Please put the questions into the
Yes.
chat. Our
So
friends and
you don't
Joby,
need to ask. Just
Joby,
ask the question.
yeah, Joby sun raha hai. So, bhai, I think for me, we really have to, when we think about youth development and we think about how do we build the capacity to become leaders and to become servants of humanity, that has to be based on principles first, right? And also has to understand the context that we are in. And I think that part of that context always has to be, how do we build how do we do this leadership development in a way that builds in us a sense of humility, that builds in us a sense of not being better than others, because a leader is not better than others. A leader assumes a responsibility, which in fact makes them more vulnerable, right, to criticism. That makes them more vulnerable to failure, to be honest.
Beshak.
But we
Beshak.
have to teach ourselves and our young people and those who are coming after us that humility, learning from others, right? And I think this is a Quranic principle, but it's also, I think, an important human principle. And I think we were talking about this earlier, Bhai. Where is that intergenerational work, right? We were lucky, we had a relationship with our grandfather, with our Nana, who was a larger than life personality, as we know, right? And we observed, and we learned through observation, and those like you who had more time with him personally learned from his example. But I think to myself, when I speak to young people at the university or elsewhere, how are we creating those spaces where between generations people can work together?
आपके लिए कमेंट आया.
हाँ जी.
उर्दू प्लीज.
Mohammed Osama bhai, मैं कोशिश करता हूँ. I want to be very precise in what I'm saying, so I want to make sure that I'm saying things the way that they're supposed to be said. But if anyone else has questions, कोई भी सवाल है, please आप लिखते हैं.
एक चीज मैं सिर्फ ऐड कर दूं, ड्रीम गर्ल या जो भी आप हैं, आपका नाम नहीं आपने बताया हुआ, ठीक है? देखिए, मेरी आप सबसे रिक्वेस्ट है, आप सवाल करें, बट सवाल करें रिलेटेड टू द टॉपिक, नॉट रिलेटेड टू एग्जाम्स और एनीथिंग एल्स, जो कि जिनमें इनका कोई ताल्लुक नहीं, सिटिंग इन द यूएस, राइट? तो इसलिए आप रिलेटेड टू द टॉपिक बात करें. एग्जाम्स की कैंसिलेशन हो या कुछ याद नहीं हो रहा, इट्स अ डिफरेंट टॉपिक, वी आर नॉट डिस्कसिंग इट राइट नाउ. एक कमेंट में,
हाँ जी भाई,
एक कमेंट में अमीना मुराद साहबा का बिल्कुल ऐड करना चाहूँगा कि मस्जिद माशरती नशोनुमा का बेहतरीन मुकाम है. मुस्तकबिल के इमाम मस्जिद के साथ माशरे भी बनने चाहिए जो लीडरशिप की तमाम महारतों से मुतसफ़ हों. बिल्कुल जी, कहिए कि वही बात है कि मस्जिद इज अ प्लेस जहाँ पर लीडरशिप डेवलपमेंट होनी चाहिए, और जहाँ पर आप
लेकिन भाई नहीं होती.
हाँ, नहीं हो रही, वही कह रहा,
नहीं हो रही ना. और जो इमाम मस्जिद है वो एक किस्म का स्पिरिचुअल वॉरलॉर्ड बना हुआ है हमारे मस्जिदों में, right? Every imam of every masjid is like apna spiritual warlord hai, like where is the connection, right?
अच्छा, मैं आपको थोड़ा सा मैं आपको रोकना चाहूँगा इन द सेंस कि आई वांट टू डाइव इनटू अनदर डायमेंशन, और मेरी डायमेंशन दो चीज़ों पे. एक आपने हल्की सी छेड़ी कि जनरेशन गैप है, जो बड़े हैं उनके साथ छोटे बैठ नहीं रहे हैं. एग्रीड, ये वाकई एक बहुत बड़ा इशू है जो हम फेस कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? उसके बाद जो अब्दुल रहमान कनाडा में पैदा हुआ, कनाडा में बड़ा, कनाडा की यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में पढ़ा, जहाँ पर हर तरह की टेम्पटेशन, जहाँ पर हर तरह की वो सारी चीज़ें थी। तो वो क्या फ़र्क था जो अब्दुल रहमान ने एज अ बच्चा, एज अ चाइल्ड देखा अपनी ग्रोथ में, कि उसके वालिदैन ने, उसके पेरेंट्स ने उसको कैसे अपब्रिंग किया, और अब अब्दुल रहमान अपने अब्दुल रहमान जूनियर के साथ वो अप्रोचेस कैसे डिफरेंट तरीके से लगा रहा है। आई थिंक ये जो है ना, ये एक बहुत बड़ी लर्निंग होगी पेरेंटिंग के हवाले से और डेवलपमेंट के हवाले से, बिकॉज आपको मैं शुरू से ज़ाहिर बचपन से देखते आ रहे हैं माशाल्लाह, यू ऑलवेज हैड अ टोटली डिफरेंट विजन। मैं उससे आपको बिफोर यू स्टार्ट, सारा का ये पॉइंट है कि एवरीवन इज ट्राइंग टू डिफेम और डिमोरलाइज इस्लामिक स्कॉलर्स, सो यंगस्टर्स डोंट सी देम एज देयर मेंटर्स।
ये भी
इसका जवाब आप ये दो।
हाँ, मैं सारा को ये कहना चाहूंगा कि एक लिहाज से आपकी बात बिल्कुल सही है, राइट? There is a general sense of diminishing the role of Islamic scholars and knowledge.
But
But
not scholars, Abdi. We're not
no,
scholars. We nobody diminishes a scholar.
right,
This is my difference of opinion in this.
right,
Those
right.
who are being diminished, they are mullahs, जो लोग जिनके पास scholarly image नहीं है, मतलब एक maths का teacher और एक doctor teaching in Yale in maths, you can't compare the two, right?
आपकी बात बिल्कुल सही है, लेकिन वो अपने आप को उसको ये जो मुल्लास की बात कर रहे हैं ना, वो अपने आप को स्कॉलर्स कहते हैं। That's the problem.
मुल्ला की नमाज और है, वो क्या है, वो शेर मेरे ज़हन से निकल गया अचानक। तो अच्छा,
but what I will say to Sarah कि you know ये जो so called Islamic scholars हैं, वो अपने आप को बदनाम कर रहे हैं।
absolutely.
You know, वो अपने आप को बदनाम कर रहे हैं। You know, मैं ये कहता हूँ कि यार, if you claim to be an Islamic scholar and you are not relevant to the conditions that people are in now, or you are teaching a religion that does not speak to the conditions that the people are in now, you are not a scholar and you don't deserve to be listened to.
Absolutely.
You have to speak to the condition of which people are in now, and I think this is the dilemma around the world, whether it's in Muslim majority countries or whether it's elsewhere, that the scholars are so divorced from the reality of people, and they are so divorced from the ways of mercy and compassion. The role of the scholar, you know, when I was taught by my teachers, they वो कहते थे कि जो फकीह जो है ना, जो फुकाहा जो हैं, their role is to try and expand the envelope of the halal so people don't fall into the haram. आजकल जो हमारे so-called ulama हैं, right? The so-called ulama are the ones who are trying to make the tent and the envelope smaller and smaller and smaller.
Absolutely.
To the
Nicholas
point
Islam
Nicholas Islam say, when the way of the Prophet was La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, welcome to the family. Come on in. हम तो ये कहते हैं यार कि आपने, if you didn't even say kalma shahadat and you want to come inside, come in the house, join us, हमारे साथ खाना खाएं, live with us, see who we are for what we are. Why do we stop people from that? And this question that was just asked by, I think, is a really important one, and I want to be very clear about it, right?
ये वाला
You know, हाँ, यही वाला, ये उमर का सवाल। उमर भाई, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका कि आपने सवाल पूछा, because इस मौजू के ऊपर there's a lot of confusion. अब देखें, जिसने ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह मुहम्मद रसूलुल्लाह कह दिया, they're in the Islamic family.
Absolutely.
Now, do you think at the time of the Prophet there weren't people who said la ilaha illallah and they didn't pray? Of course there were.
Raisul Munafiqeen.
Huh? Yeah. So one is the munafiqeen, but there are then the honest people who accepted Islam, but who struggle, yaar. हम अब जो struggle है, the struggle is real. We struggle with lack of practice. We struggle with alcohol addiction. We struggle with drug addiction. We struggle with all kinds of things.
बड़ी वो
right?
क्लासिक एग्जांपल है, मुझे उनका नाम साहबी का भूल गया है, who was alcohol addict, और वो नहीं छोड़ते थे, सिर्फ उन्होंने जंग से पहले छोड़ी और वो शहीद हो गए जंग में, नाम मेरे ज़हन से निकल गया। तो yes, there are many.
We have so many. So you know, when I hear a question like this, I'm reminded of one of the students of Sheikh Al-Akbar Ibn Arabi. There's a wonderful story about him, and he was on a boat in the river in Damascus. तो एक रात का वक्त था, and you know the evenings are cool in the summertime. So him and his companions were on a boat, and they were going down the river in Damascus, or they were having spiritual discourses. तो उनने देखा कि और एक और कश्ती है कि उनके साथ साथ जा रही है जिसके अंदर लोग गाना गा रहे हैं, बाजा बज रहे हैं, there's music, there's revelry, maybe there's alcohol. So one of the young students says to the sheikh, यार शेख देखें इनकी हालत क्या है, इनके खिलाफ दुआ मांगे. And you know what the sheikh said? Sheikh said, Ya Allah, make them happier in the next life than they are today.
वाह वाह, मुझे इसके ऊपर आपके अली वो वाकया याद आ गया हजरत अली का. जब खवारिज ने हजरत अली के खिलाफ जिंदगी उनकी अजाब कर दी, जब जंग की उनके साथ, कि हमें कत्लत उस्मान के ऊपर, तो तमाम सहाबा ने अली रज़ी अल्लाह अन्हु को कहा कि खलीफा या अमीरुल मोमिनीन इनको मदीना से निकाल दें. एंड व्हाट डिड अली रिप्लाई? अली रज़ी अल्लाह अन्हु सेड, उन्होंने कहा कि ये मुसलमान नहीं रहे. लेकिन नहीं, ये मुसलमान हैं, भटक गए हैं. They are probably misled at the time. So if we let them go now, we will lose them forever.
बिल्कुल.
Yeah, I think this is, and Ali was the the door of wisdom.
बिल्कुल. Nay, there's so much wisdom in that, bhai, that we have to make sure that we cannot leave. We have to give people a way in, right? Not to give them a way out, right? Yes, and that is it. And they can't. You can be Muslim and you can drink alcohol, and you're just sinful. You can be a Muslim and lie, right? What did the Prophet say? He says a Muslim is one ke yaar wo sab kuch kar sakta hai, including zina, lekin he won't lie. So what about all of us? I talk about myself, who find ourselves in a situation where we sometimes lie. So let's be our Islam is not a staff by which to judge people. Our Islam, especially in the time that we're living in now, should be a means by which to lift people up. And that's the kind of a youth development and leadership development we need amongst our young people, right? That we need our young people to be trained and mentored and need to be built up so they are people of compassion, right? So they're people of mercy.
So going to, last year we did a program on Hadith and Mercy. I think वो मुझे इसीलिए वो बिल्कुल बड़ा ज़बरदस्त लोग, मैं viewers आपको recommend करूँगा. If you go to my channel which is the youtube.com/minutemantra, आपके सामने स्क्रीन पे चल रहा है, तो उसमें आप रमज़ान बैठक की प्लेलिस्ट में जाइएगा. अब्दुल रहमान के साथ मेरी पिछली रमज़ान की पूरी एक कन्वर्सेशन है on Hadith and Mercy. Must listen to that. Must listen. Okay. Hadith and Mercy की. Okay. अच्छा, अभी मैं based on these things what you just said, मैं वापस उसी सवाल की तरफ जाना चाहूँगा. Shortly, let's say in 5 minutes or so, let us know how did Abdul Rahman, in fact, how was Abdul Rahman raised? How did that raising impact आपको, या आपकी परवरिश और फिर अब आप जो आगे परवरिश कर रहे हो, ये चेन कैसे बनी है?
No, thank you, Ali Bhai, and just the thanks and all the praise goes to my mother and my father, जो अम्मी और अब्बू ने हमारे लिए किया, जो हमको तालीम दी, जो हमको तरबियत दी, और जो हमारे लिए एक माहौल बनाया. For that, we are in their debt. One of the things I learned at a young age, Ali Bhai, was I learned, and it's one of the most important lessons, actually, that now that I look back, I'm turning 46 in a few days, that I think about now over my lifetime. One of the most important lessons my parents taught me was to sit with the elders. यार हम 3 साल के थे, हम 4 साल के थे, 5 साल के थे, जब हमने मस्जिद जाना और हल्का का टाइम आया और uncles and aunties were sitting together, अब्बू अम्मी ने कहना कि आप हमारे साथ इधर आके बैठे, दूसरे बच्चे शायद कहीं और खेल रहे हो, आपने आके इधर बैठना है. I am sure I wasn't happy about it.
I can imagine.
But that training of sitting, listening, आप your legs are hurting, आप आप अपनी cross-legged बैठे हुए हैं ज़मीन पर, तो Didn't matter. You sit, you listen. You sit in the company, you listen to the conversations. And at some point, Ali Bhai, you start listening because you have nothing else to do. And you start listening to what they're saying. And then you start to see, there's one perspective, and then this person is presenting a different perspective, and that person is presenting a different perspective. Then you go back and you ask, well, ye uncle kya keh rahe the? Ye auntie kya keh rahi thi? Ye mujhe baat samajh nahi aayi. Ye sensible baat nahi thi.
Ye वहां पर आपको आगे से snub नहीं किया गया, वहां से आगे आपको explain किया गया.
Exactly. So the idea that we were explaining.
ये है parenting जिसको मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, youth development.
और फिर especially मामा ने मुझे कहना कि आप जाके देखें कुरान के अंदर क्या लिखा हुआ है. So we take the Quran, I'd open the translation, I'd read the translation, I'd try to think about what it was saying. फिर अम्मी से बात करनी, बैठ के थोड़ा सा analysis करना, गुफ्तगू करनी कि कुरान क्या कह रहा है, ये कह रहा है, and then a natural interest developed. So when I would go to the bookshop at the mosque, and this was another wonderful experience that I had. Uncle Ali, may Allah bless him and bless his soul, he passed away a few years ago. हमारे Uncle Ali बख्श गायना से थे. तो अंकल अली जो है ना वो किताबों की दुकान मस्जिद के अंदर वो चलाते थे. तो उनको पता था कि मुझे पढ़ना बड़ा अच्छा लगता था. वो मेरे लिए जो स्पेशल किताबें जो थे ना वो he would put aside, right? He would put aside those books for me, and then he would bring me into the bookshop and he'd say, look at what I saved for you. He said, I know you'll enjoy this, and look at this book. And he was opening up a world to me. Books on Islamic art, I remember he gave me a book on Islam in Bosnia. I was so fascinated about Islam in Europe. He would save things for me. And then, of course, our house was filled with books. So we'd buy these books, we'd take them home, we'd take care of them, we'd read them, we'd study them, we'd look at them, we'd share them. This idea that the elders were also looking after our knowledge and were feeding us, not only with food and with good company, but they were really feeding us knowledge. And then I think the third part of it, Bhai, was that this point that you made about we were allowed to question. We were allowed to question, we were allowed to challenge. Now, sometimes that question or challenge wasn't well received. Sometimes the elders would be offended by our honest questions. But that's okay. That's okay. Because that's also part of the way that we have to negotiate, right, with each other and one another. And we've always had the sense that we would, we were told that when people of knowledge and experience were coming to the house, हमारे घर में आते थे, imam, leaders, scholars, that we had to sit and we had to ask them questions and learn from them. तो हम सवाल तैयार रखते थे कि जब कोई आएगा हम उनसे पूछेंगे. And then, Bhai, I was so lucky in my life to have teachers who were they were generous with their time. I think about one of our teachers, Imam Maulana Muhammad Naseem, India के थे, जमात इस्लामी के साथ उनका ताल्लुकात था. And when he lived in the United States, and when he would come and visit, he used to love astronomy. And so he would talk to me about astronomy and astrophysics. And then he and I would go together to the museum, and we'd go to the planetarium, right? It's amazing. He would spend the whole day with me, 10 to 11-year-old boy, and how astronomy ki baat karte the, how we'd go see the stars, we'd talk about these things. And now I think about it, he was a scholar, a leader, and yet he had time for this because he was learning. And this is the other thing, Bhai, that I want to say. Mentorship isn't about only the elders giving.
Yes.
It's about the elders learning. Bilkul bhai. Aapko to pata hai. The whole idea of mentorship is that you must have the humility, whether you're 46, 56, 76, or 86, to learn from those who are younger.
मैं जब अपनी ट्रेनिंग्स कराता हूँ ना, जब सेशंस कर रहा होता हूँ,
हाँ जी,
मैं हमेशा अपने हर सेशन में एक बात कहता हूँ कि अगर आप मुझे नहीं सिखाएंगे, मैं आपको नहीं सिखाऊंगा. I am a very, very greedy trainer. So if you want to learn from me, you have to teach me.
Yes, so, wonderful.
छोटी सी चीज़ यहाँ पर थोड़ा करूँगा व्यूअर्स, मैं एक आपसे रिक्वेस्ट है कि देखिए मैंने आपके सवाल हमारे लिए सबसे अहम है, ये प्रोग्राम्स आपके लिए हैं, बट अगर आपके एक सवाल का जवाब में डिले होता है तो मेरा गेस्ट बोल रहा है, आप खुद सोचिए मेहमान आपके घर आए, आप मेहमान से कहेंगे चुप पहले मेरी बात सुनो, ऐसे नहीं होगा, राइट? तो इसलिए जब वो बात कर रहे हैं आपके सवाल हम बिल्कुल लेंगे, ऑल्दो कि आपका सवाल कुछ इररेलेवेंट है, एग्जाम्स की पढ़ाई नहीं होती। अभी मैं एक छोटा सा इसका जवाब देना चाहूँगा, फिर
Sure, भाई, sure, absolutely.
एग्जाम से पढ़ाई नहीं होती, ये बड़ी एक अजीब सी स्टेटमेंट है जो मुझे सुनने को मिल रही है आजकल, खास तौर पे याद नहीं रहता। हजरत राबिया बसरी का एक वाकया मैं भी किसी को सुना रहा था, वो आग हाथ में लेकर जा रही थी, तो किसी ने पूछा कि आप ये आग क्यों लेकर जा रही हैं? मैंने कहा मैं जहन्नुम को और जन्नत को मैं आग लगाने जा रही हूँ। जन्नत को आग लगाने जा रही, वो क्यों? उसने कहा क्योंकि अगर मुझे इबादत इसलिए करनी है कि मुझे जन्नत में जाना है तो मुझे उसको आग लगा देनी चाहिए, और अगर मुझे ये बात इसलिए करनी है कि मुझे जहन्नुम से बचना है तो मैं जहन्नुम को आग लगा दूंगी। तो मुझे तो इबादत इसलिए करनी है कि मुझे अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला के करीब जाना है, मुझे अल्लाह डिजर्व मेरी इबादत, और अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला ने, व्यूअर्स मैं आपको ये बात बताना चाहता हूँ, हम पे जो सबसे पहली चीज फर्ज की है वो है इल्म हासिल करना, ठीक है? तो अगर आपने अपनी ये किताबें, ये इल्म, इनको इसलिए हासिल किया, इसलिए इनको पढ़ा कि इनको पढ़ के आपको अल्लाह का कुर्ब मिलेगा, तो कैसे याद नहीं होगा मुझे बता देना यार। आप पढ़ते हो नंबर लेने के लिए, नहीं याद होगा, कोई दुनिया का उस्ताद आपको याद नहीं करा सकता। आप याद करो इल्म लेने के लिए, आपके तमाम सवालों का जवाब इसके अंदर मौजूद है। और दूसरा जो सवाल था आपका उमर, मैं उसकी तरफ भी आना चाह रहा हूँ कि आपको ये ऐप्स की कमी नहीं है। इस्लाम 360 इज अ ब्यूटीफुल ऐप जो पूरी दुनिया, आजकल हर ऐप में, बल्कि हर ऐप में पूरी दुनिया के तमाम वो चलते हैं इस्लामिक अजान की टाइमिंग, तो आई डोंट थिंक इट इज दैट बिग एन इशू। अभी आपके लिए कमेंट आ गया है अम्मी का।
हाँ, नहीं, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका सबिया खाला. This is from our own family. These are lessons that you learned as a youngster, and that we learned from you and from our mothers and our fathers. And you know, it requires that kind of learning requires a sense of patience, but there has to be, like we said at the beginning, humility, right? There has to be a sense that we are always learning, that we are always growing, that process of learning never stops. And also, bhai, that we can learn from anyone or any situation. Why? You know, if we believe in a God, if we believe in a Khuda, jiske haath mein sab kuch hai, then we know that every encounter we have is decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that every encounter we have has meaning and wisdom behind it, right? And that means that every person we meet, every circumstance we come across, every joy or difficulty we find in our life, we should ask ourselves, okay, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending to me? What is God teaching me? What am I supposed to take from this situation? And this is the sign of the, you know, the person on the path, the seeker on the path to God will always ask this question. We'll always ask this question.
अब इसकी बड़ी सिंपल सी एनालॉजी है, मैं ये अपने अक्सर सेशंस में लोगों को बताता हूँ कि मैं जब श्लम्बर्जन में था तो उन्होंने मुझे, मैं मैकेनिकल इंजीनियर था, उन्होंने मुझे इंजीनियरिंग के काम के साथ साथ कभी अकाउंट्स में भेज देना, कभी उन्होंने मुझे एडमिन में भेज देना, कभी मुझे HSE में भेज देना, सेफ्टी में, कभी क्लीनिंग में भेज देना। तो मैं एकदम तंग आ गया, मैंने सोचा यार बात सुन, मैं अपनी जॉब करके आया होता हूँ, इंजीनियरिंग की, थका होता हूँ, खुदा के वास्ते तुम मुझे क्यों ये सब करा रहे हो? You know the question the guy asked me, instead of replying to me, he said, do you want to grow in your career? So if you want to grow, we need to groom you all around so you understand the problems of every single department. तो भाईजान ये एक छोटी सी कंपनी की बात हो रही है, तो अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला अगर हमें ग्रो करके जन्नत के आला तरीन मुकाम में भेजना चाहता है तो वो क्या हमें इन चीजों में ग्रूम नहीं करेगा?
Absolutely, bhai.
It's a matter of grooming.
It is. And it's, you know, we have to see, and this is the challenge, right? Because into each of our lives we will have tragedy and we will have difficulty, right? And you know, bhai, I want to share something with you because, you know, here, you know, where I am, we've had a lot of sadness in the last in the last 2 weeks. A very close friend of ours, an imam, a chaplain at Princeton University, Sohaib Sultan, passed away after a 14-month encounter, I would say, with cancer. I wouldn't even call it a battle, and I'll tell you why. Imam Sohaib was a remarkable individual. He was a community builder. He was a teacher. He was a mentor. He was a university chaplain. He was a visionary. But, when he found out 14 months ago, last March, that he had a very rare form of cancer that was very little chance that it would be treated, it was amazing to watch his journey. He taught us over the last 14 months on how to live well, but also how to die well. And I saw him along with my friend, the Imam Umar Bajwa, who's the chaplain and imam here at Yale. We saw him just less than 10 days before he passed. And we sat with him. And Bhai, I want to share something he told us, because I think it's so important for this conversation and about youth development. He said, I realized when I was told about my cancer and that it was going to be inoperable and it was going to be very difficult to treat. He said, I had to come to the point where I had to accept Allah's decision. Acceptance, right?
Number one, acceptance.
Acceptance. And so he said, acceptance, I found, he said, after a lifetime of being, engaged in the work of deen and of the spirit, he said, acceptance we came to. He says, but then I had to get to the point of rida, contentment. Not just accept. Hum accept karte hain, but we're not content with the decision.
Radhi bil rida.
Exactly. So he said that took longer. लेकिन इमाम साहब ने हमको कहा, अल्लाह उनको जन्नत अता फरमाए. He said मैं पहुंच गया, मैं रिदा पे पहुंच गया. मैंने कहा जो भी अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह अल्लाह ने हमको दिया है, we are content with it. हम उसके इनकार नहीं करते, right? लेकिन in the days before he died, what was on his heart? He asked the question. He said, it isn't enough to have contentment. He says, I have to be happy with Allah's decision. I have to be happy that my daughter, there is some greater wisdom that my daughter will not have a father, and his daughter is only 4 years old, right? That my wife will not have a husband, that I have parents who are still living and who will not experience seeing their son grow older with them. He said, lekin main, wo udhar pahunch gaye the. I have not seen someone who is facing death so happy, khush, smiling, welcoming, loving. He was in so much pain the day we visited him. And he almost fell into a coma the night before we came. But wow, just showed us happiness. And yaar bhai, this is the youth development that we need to talk about.
मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ अभी it's not कि अल्लाह मुझसे राजी हो, कहते हैं कि अगर मैं अल्लाह से राजी हो गया तो सब कुछ
absolutely. And yaar, and हमारा इस्लाम जो है ना, हमने we have created a fear Islam, right?
हाँ.
कि जैसे बिल्कुल आपने राबी अल-बसरी की बात, इतनी खूबसूरत बात की, हाँ, कि मैं अपनी जो if I'm doing my worship, मैं अपनी इबादत जन्नत के लिए कर रही हूँ जो जन्नत को आग लग जाए. मैं अपनी इबादत इसलिए कर रही हूँ कि मैं जहन्नम ना जाऊँ, जहन्नम के अंदर पानी भेज दो, right? लेकिन मेरी इबादत होनी चाहिए मोहब्बत, for the love of Allah,
because
for the love of Allah. But absolutely, He is the source of all love. Any joy, happiness, goodness we have in our lives flows from the Creator who created us out of love. So shouldn't that be our goal? And this is why the Islam that we need to be teaching ourselves first of all and everyone else is an Islam of joy, is the Islam of happiness, is the Islam that makes us smile. And look at the Prophet upon whom be peace, Rasul ko pata tha कि what awaits us. Lekin, what did the people used to say? Never that we saw the Prophet that he wasn't smiling and he wasn't radiant, right?
और मैं आपको मजे की बात बताऊं अब्दी, ये सोनी अगर ने बात काट दी. बाय द वे यहाँ पे एक सवाल आया था आपके बारे में कि आर यू अ बॉर्न मुस्लिम और अ कन्वर्टेड? ही इज माशाल्लाह बॉर्न मुस्लिम. तो वो एक सवाल ये आया था कि सॉरी वो आप सल्लम के बारे में जो स्माइल की बात है, यू विल बी अमेज्ड टू फाइंड आउट. मैं आजकल जो रिसर्च कर रहा हूँ, मैंने आपसे पहले भी बताया था कि माइंड साइंसेज एंड बॉडी लैंग्वेज एंड ऑल दीज एंड कुरान एंड सुन्ना. तो हमारी बॉडी लैंग्वेज की साइंस जो है ना वो ये कहती है कि इफ यू रियली वांट टू विन, पहले क्या करती है, देयर आर टू टाइप्स ऑफ स्माइल्स, रियल स्माइल एंड अ फेक स्माइल. नाउ फेक स्माइल का लफ्ज निकाल दिया उन्होंने. वो कहते हैं इफ यू रियली वांट टू विन हार्ट्स एंड विन कन्वर्सेशंस, यू शुड ऑलवेज वेयर अ सोशल स्माइल.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
ठीक है. नाउ यू थिंक अबाउट इट कि अल्लाह के नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम तो अबू जहल को भी स्माइल करते हुए मिलते थे. सोशल स्माइल.
Amazing.
और मतलब ऐसी ऐसी चीजें सुभान अल्लाह. मैं बताऊं कि मैं हमेशा एक बात कहता हूँ व्यूअर्स, और मेरी आपसे ये रिक्वेस्ट भी है, मशवरा भी है और तजर्बा भी है. इट टुक मी 40 years टू स्टार्ट लर्निंग सीरा. जो मुझसे पहले इससे कम उम्र में है, अभी से सीरा पढ़नी शुरू कर दो. बिकॉज की एक बहुत बड़ी वजह है, अलावी है मेरा ख्याल है, उनका मैं उनके शेख अलावी, उनका मैं अभी बयान सुन रहा था हम सीरा नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, और उन्होंने कहा कि we all Muslims across the board love Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's no second thought about it. Now imagine you love someone without knowing him. Think if you know him,
exactly,
at what level your love will be. आपका प्यार उनके बारे में जितना जानोगे, प्यार कितना बढ़ता जाएगा. Just सोचो. ठीक है. तो ये जो ना,
absolutely, it's such a powerful idea. ये जो आपने बात की है ना, like you know, मैं कहता हूँ कि अब रमजान का महीना है यार, सब जो सुन रहे हैं ये एक रमजान का अपने एक प्रैक्टिस बना दें कि always try to show joy on your face. I say this to myself. यार, we're hungry. लंबे दिन है हमारे लिए. You know, we get to the end. We're all annoyed. But the moment that we feel annoyed, just smile. Raise that sense of joy up and see what happens to us.
और उसकी साइंटिफिक भी, once you smile, आपके सेरोटोनिन प्रोड्यूस होंगे, आपके ऑक्सीटोसिन प्रोड्यूस होंगे, आपके हार्मोन्स ऑफ जॉय, आपकी बॉडी जो है वो क्लींस हो जाएगी. So what difference does it make यार, अगर वो it takes 14 to smile and 72 to frown. So why do you want to use more muscles and not?
You know, it's such a wonderful, there's such a wonderful analogy in that as well, right? Because there's this idea that smiling and joyfulness, you know, is something which starts here but permeates everything. Right?
मेरे पास एक स्टूडेंट पूरा ना एक रिसर्च है, आई थिंक रिसर्च की थी स्टैनफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी ने.
हाँ जी.
उसमें उन्होंने पूरे वो बताया हुआ है कि आप जब स्माइल करते हैं, दे हैव अबाउट 18 डिफरेंट व्यूज ऑफ द बॉडी. सो व्हेन यू आर लाफिंग, व्हेन यू आर हैप्पी, एंड आई ऑलवेज से अ हैप्पी परफॉर्मर इज द बेस्ट परफॉर्मर. तो वो कहते हैं जब आप हैप्पी होते हैं तो आपकी बॉडी फुल एंगेज्ड है फ्रॉम टॉप टू बॉटम. दैट इज द ओनली टाइम व्हेन योर बॉडी इज एंगेज्ड. एंड जो लोग हैप्पीनेस नहीं कर पाते, मेरे जो क्लाइंट्स या स्टूडेंट्स कहते हैं सर हमसे सीरियस है सर, हमसे हंसा नहीं जाता, तो मैं उन्हें कहता हूँ पेन ले लो, पेन ऐसे रख लिया करो.
That's so interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that when we can't do that, right? When we can't smile and that we can't be joyful, you know, that's real. That is, I think we have to question ourselves, right? We have to question what is in us that is preventing us from doing that. Bhaijan, ek aur cheez kehna chahta hu. I know we're slowly running out of time, but I want to say this. You know, there's a lot of methodologies in leadership and youth development today. You know this. This is your world, right? And I think those methodologies are important. I think it's important for us to learn from science, from wisdom, from research, and the field is always growing. My only, I would say, my only caution about these methodologies to myself and to anyone else, right, is that whatever methodology we use, we have to try and orient it to a worthy goal. Right?
Absolutely.
And I think that so much of the methodologies of leadership development, youth development are exactly, jaise aapne pehle kaha tha, in order to get marks, in order to get power, in order to get influence. You know, Dale Carnegie said, how to win friends and influence people, right? That's what he wanted to do. Our goal must be greater than that. Our goal, of course, must be to reach the presence of God. But on the way there, let's not forget that our goal is how we can be a means, sabab, by which the mercy, compassion, love, and justice of God can manifest itself on the earth.
Absolutely.
This needs to be, we need to see ourselves as a means to bring those things so that we will have Allah's mercy. If we behave mercifully in the world, if we act for mercy in the world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us mercy. If we have compassion, we will be given compassion. If we are generous, we will be given generosity.
99.
Bilkul, and by whatever difficulty we find ourselves in, and God knows, मैं तो कह सकता हूं, there are people in real difficulty, real hardship. Look at what's happening in India right now. Look at what's happening in other parts of the world where there is so much suffering, so much oppression, so much difficulty, so much fire, right? So much fire that people are facing. The last third of Ramadan is coming up where we say freedom from the fire. Or मैं कहता हूं कि it's not freedom from the fire of hell only. It's freedom from the fires in which we are living now, the difficulties in which we're living now, the systems in which we are living now. And most of all, bhai, it's the fire of our own nafs al-lawama, right? The soul that calls to evil. These are fires. Lekin dekhe, I don't want to presuppose the difficulty people are going through. Lekin, this too is a guest. You know, like Rumi says in his poem, the guest house, right? He says that each sorrow, each difficulty is a guest. Receive the guest with honor because the guest is bringing you a message from Allah. And maybe it is in this difficulty, maybe this difficult time that we are passing through, maybe our eternal felicity is based on this. Maybe through embracing this moment, as difficult as it is, we will find ourselves drawn closer to Allah and His Messenger. And I think about my friend Sohaib, whose body was filled with cancer, who was in excruciating pain. I never saw anyone in my life yet who was so ill, yet so radiant and smiling, like just joyful. और मैंने कहा यार ये तो आदमी ने मैंने अपनी जिंदगी में एक वलीउल्लाह देख लिया है. मैंने देख लिया कि जो वली होता है ना, उस how does he behave, how does she behave when treated with difficulty. And bhai, that's the calling, and mashallah, these conversations that you're having I think are so important, because once again they focus on life and lived experience and reality. And if anyone who's watching this, I mean, really, this is what a wonderful opportunity to be able to focus on real life, real experience. Because life isn't lived in books. It's not lived in theories, right? It's lived by living. Life is lived by living. And so as we live, let us live in a way that connects us to the most merciful one, the most generous one, and the most compassionate one.
फातिमा ने यहाँ लिखा है, नफ्स लवामा बहुत मददगार साबित होता है नफ्स मुतमइन्ना तक का सफर तय करने के लिए.
It's true. Absolutely. Thank you, Fatima. बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. That's beautiful. That's perfectly said.
मैं यहाँ पर हमेशा एक बात कहता आता हूँ व्यूअर्स, अच्छे वक्त के अंदर एक बहुत ही बुरी बात है, वो ज्यादा देर नहीं रहता, लेकिन बुरे वक्त में एक बहुत अच्छी बात है, वो भी ज्यादा देर नहीं रहता. तो हमेशा अपने आप को कहा करें, दिस शैल पास टू, ये भी गुजर ही जाएगा. फिर वो चाहे अच्छा हो या बुरा, वो गुजर ही जाएगा.
बिल्कुल भाई.
और अच्छा हो तो शुक्र के लिए सर झुकाएं, और अगर बुरा हो तो भी शुक्र के लिए सर झुकाएं. दोनों सूरतों में मैं हमेशा ये कहता हूँ कि शाकिर इंसान का शुक्र नजर आना चाहिए, बताना नहीं चाहिए.
That's very profound, because your shukr is only as deep as the way that your shukr transforms you.
Absolutely.
For us, gratitude is not something we say with the tongue. We should say it with the tongue often, but we want from the tongue for it to go into the heart. Absolutely. And you're right, bhai. I mean, I ask myself, okay, मैं शुक्र तो कहता रहता हूँ अपनी जुबान के साथ, लेकिन how much have I allowed that thankfulness to lodge in my heart? And that's the work of Ramadan. In Ramadan, that's what we're working on. Every time we say Alhamdulillah, let us feel Alhamdulillah, okay, Bismillah. And Alhamdulillah doesn't mean we sit back alhamdulillah means we accept and we move forward. Right?
बिल्कुल मेरे साथ ना वो कल मैं आज इमाम विसाम आई डोंट नो इफ यू नो इमाम विसाम शरीफ ही इज
हाँ जी।
जॉइनिंग मी इंशाल्लाह
माशाल्लाह।
on one of the conversations.
Wonderful,
कल
wonderful.
कल मैं उनकी एक लाइव सुन रहा था and I'll close it with that live.
हाँ जी।
What he was doing is he said people were giving it a name, meditation, ये वो. He said don't give it any name, just close your eyes, just feel your breath. Viewers मैं चाहता हूँ अपनी आंखें बंद करें और अपने सांस को महसूस करें. आप जब आप सांस अंदर लें और कहें अल्लाह अकबर और जब सांस छोड़े तो अकबर पे छोड़े, अपने अंदर इस एहसास को और अपने माइंड से कहें कि मेरे दिमाग मुझे तमाम सोचे मेरी खत्म कर दे. इस वक्त मैं जैसे वो इधर उधर होने लगे कहें ला हौला वला कुव्वता, फिर वापस आ जाए अल्लाह अकबर. और उस वो जो एक लम्हे को जो आपको फील होगा वो शुक्र का पहला कदम, वो एक एहसास. तो एनीवेज अब्दुल आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया भाई. और मैं आपके साथ तो हमेशा ही मजा आता ही आता है इंशाल्लाह.
So nice to be with you, Ali Bhai, and so nice to have Sabia Khala and our family and our friends with us as well.
And viewers आपका भी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. मैं अल्लाह सुब्हान ताला से दुआ करता हूँ कि मुझे आपको हम सबको अल्लाह सुब्हान ताला अपने हिफ्ज़ व अमान में रखें. अल्लाह सुब्हान ताला हम सबको नबी पाक सल्लम के हाथ से हौज़ कौसर का पानी पीने और आला तरीन जन्नात में उनका हमसाया बन के उनकी खिदमत करने का मौका अता फरमाए. अल्लाह सुब्हान ताला मुझे आपको हम सबको जो कुछ हमने कहा है, ये जो महफिल सजाई है, इसको हम सब एक दूसरे के साथ उन्हीं आला तरीन जन्नात में गवाह बने कि हमने अल्लाह की रज़ा के लिए किया और अल्लाह इसको हमारे मीज़ान में कबूल फरमाए. एंड मैं आपसे ये भी दुआ की दरख्वास्त करूँगा कि हमारे इंडिया में जो भाई और भी दुनिया में इवन पाकिस्तान में हर जगह पर जो भाई जो बहनें हमारी इस वक्त कोरोना की वबा की वजह से तकलीफ़ में हैं, अल्लाह सुब्हान ताला उनके लिए आसानी करे. हमारे मुसलमान जहाँ जहाँ हैं उनके लिए और ह्यूमैनिटी भी जहाँ जहाँ है सबके लिए हम दुआगो हैं कि सबको अल्लाह ताला अपने हिफ्ज़ व अमान में रखे. वैसे मैं एक खुशखबरी दे दूँ कि खुशखबरी ये है कि वबा से जब कोई मुसलमान अगर फौत होता है तो उसको नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने शहीद का रुतबा दिया है.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
ठीक है. तो इसलिए ये जो है ना इस चीज़ को ध्यान में रखिएगा. जाते जाते अब्दुल हमीना मुराद साहबा कह रही है रहीकुल मखतूम सीरत पर बेहतरीन किताब है. नौजवान अगर ये किताब पढ़ लें तो मौशरे में बड़ी बिल्कुल सही कहा अमीना जी. रहीकुल मखतूम इज़ एन अमेजिंग बुक. और अम्मी का मैसेज आपके लिए. देन आई विल से अस्सलाम वालेकुम.
थैंक यू सबिया खाला.
अभी आप ऑनलाइन रहना. व्यूअर्स आपसे इजाज़त लेते हैं. दुआ में याद रखिएगा. अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू.
वालेकुम